factory hummed with the rhythmic clang of metal and the hiss of steam. Flames licked the sides of the massive furnaces, casting flickering shadows on the soot-streaked walls. Workers moved like phantoms in the dim light, their faces obscured by the thick haze that filled the air. Among them was Stephen Maddox, an overseer with an air of authority, his piercing eyes surveying the laborers with an expression of silent scrutiny. Maddox had built a reputation for himself within the Ironworks, a man of precision and cold efficiency. He had no patience for mistakes, and his men knew it well. But there was one man who threatened his authority, one man whose presence in the factory had become an unbearable thorn in his side: James Haldane. Haldane was everything Maddox was not. He was charismatic, well-liked by the men, and carried an unspoken challenge in his every action. His hands were skilled, his knowledge of the factory's inner workings profound. Where Maddox ruled through fear, Haldane led through respect. It was this contrast that fueled the deep resentment burning within Maddox. The factory's most prized structure was the Great Cone, a towering metal edifice used for smelting iron. It was an awe-inspiring sight, a monolithic creation that loomed over the factory like a giant sentinel. Its construction had been overseen by Haldane, a fact that only deepened Maddox's hatred. Every time he saw it, he saw a symbol of Haldane's success, his influence, his inevitable rise. Jealousy festered, turning into something far darker. Maddox knew that as long as Haldane remained in the factory, his own authority would continue to wane. And so he began to scheme. The factory was a dangerous place, after all. Accidents happened. The furnaces were unforgiving, the machines relentless. It would take only the smallest misstep to turn a man into another nameless casualty of industry. The night of the incident was like any other. Workers moving through their shifts, the air thick with smoke and sweat. Maddox had watched Haldane climb the metal staircase leading up to the cone's observation platform. He had seen him lean over the railing, inspecting the flow of molten iron below. It was the perfect moment. Maddox approached silently, his heart hammering in his chest. The hiss of steam masked his footsteps as he drew closer. Haldane, oblivious to the presence behind him, continued his inspection. In a single, calculated movement, Maddox reached out and gave a forceful shove. The world seemed to slow as Haldane tumbled forward, his body pitching over the railing. A sharp, startled cry rang out before being swallowed by the roar of the furnace below. Then silence. Maddox stood frozen, his breath coming in shallow gasps. It was done. The factory carried on as though nothing had changed. The men murmured about Haldane's disappearance, their voices tinged with sorrow and unease. But in the unforgiving world of industry, work did not stop for the dead. Maddox assumed his new role as the undisputed overseer, his grip on power tightening. And yet, something gnawed at him, an unease that refused to be ignored. Days passed, then weeks. Whispers began to circulate among the workers. Strange noises in the dead of night, shadows moving where none should be. Some claimed to have seen a figure standing atop the great cone, watching with unseen eyes. Maddox dismissed it all as superstition, yet an unshakable dread crept into his mind. One evening, as he walked through the empty factory, he heard it, a sound that froze him in place. A whisper, low and insidious, carrying his name through the darkness. His breath hitched. He turned sharply, his eyes darting across the silent machines. Nothing. Only the distant glow of the furnaces remained. Sleep became a fleeting luxury. Each night, he woke in a cold sweat, the sound of that whisper still echoing in his ears. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, reaching for him with unseen hands. The factory, once a place of dominion, now felt like a cage closing in around him. One fateful night, Maddox found himself standing at the base of the great cone, staring up at its looming silhouette. A morbid compulsion drove him forward, his feet carrying him up the winding metal staircase. The air grew heavy, the silence oppressive. As he reached the top, a sudden gust of wind rattled the structure, sending a shiver down his spine. Then he saw it. A figure stood at the edge of the platform, its back turned to him. The shape was unmistakable, Haldane. His breath caught in his throat. It wasn't possible. Haldane was gone, lost to the depths of the furnace. And yet there he was. The figure turned slowly, the motion unnatural, deliberate. Maddox's blood ran cold as he saw the face. Charred, burned beyond recognition. Yet the eyes remained. They locked onto him with an intensity that rooted him to the spot. Maddox stumbled back, his foot catching on the edge of the metal grating. A scream tore from his throat as he felt himself tipping backward, the world tilting into chaos. The last thing he saw was the endless darkness of the furnace below, waiting to claim him as it had claimed his victim. By morning, the factory was abuzz with the news of Maddox's tragic accident. The men spoke in hushed voices, their expressions grim. The cone remained standing, silent and unyielding, a monument to the sins it had witnessed. And from its peak, in the shadows of the night, a figure still watched, waiting for the next soul to fall into its depths. The factory resumed its rhythm, the clang of metal and hiss of steam masking the unease that settled among the workers. Though no one spoke of it openly, they knew. Something lingered in the ironworks, something beyond flesh and bone. New overseers came and went, each lasting only a short while before succumbing to inexplicable fear, their minds unraveling beneath the weight of unseen eyes. On particularly quiet nights, the foreman swore they could hear whispers winding through the machinery, voices calling names that were long forgotten. The great cone stood unmoving, its purpose eternal, its hunger insatiable. And in the dim light of the factory, where shadows stretched long and the fires never truly died, the ironworks waited for the next victim, the next transgression, the next whisper in the dark.